Joining us now in the studio is Emira Woods. She's a member of the International Working Group for Africans Rising and an associate fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies. From Nairobi, we're joined by Nanjala Nyabola. She's a writer and political analyst. Also from Nairobi is Abdullahi Boru Halakhe. He's a security and policy analyst specializing in the Horn of Africa. And Dorina Bekoe is an associate professor at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies right here in Washington, D.C. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Emira, let me start with you. So the election is over. We're now hearing allegations of fraud from the opposition leader, Raila Odinga. He says the election results were hacked. There's also been reports, as we heard from our reporter, of violence, minor violence. Train services have been disrupted. But broadly speaking, what do you make of the conduct of the election?
Well, I think broadly speaking, the election seemed to have gone forward as scheduled, and you know, I think overall, it seems like there was a great turnout. You saw people lined up throughout many of the polling stations, and election observers were commenting on essentially how the turnout was magnificent, and clearly the opposition, Raila Odinga's party, NASA, put out claims even before the elections of tampering, and those claims have now been repeated. And so there's a lot still to be seen in terms of how the Election Commission handles these claims and these allegations, and what type of responses happen through the Election Commission. But I think we've got to be concerned that there is that commitment to maintaining peace and stability in the country, both on the side of the opposition leaders as well as on the side of the police. Quite frankly, it is disturbing when, according to Amnesty's reports and others, of the live bullets being used with protesters today. I mean, some of those concerns, I think, could head things in a different direction quickly. So I think we've got to reinforce the need for stability and for calm and for saner voices to be heard.
Tell me, the fact that there was a big turnout for this election, does it give the outcome some kind of added legitimacy?
Well, I think it's important, not only the turnout, but also the fact that young people took to the streets and voted in what seems to be pretty significant numbers. It is young people, that young demographic, that seems to be looking at the broader needs of the country, the long term, right? Looking at issues of economic well-being and stability, looking beyond ethnic issues. And it's really the future leadership, not only at the national level, but at the local level, that will come from that demographic. So I think a good turnout from that demographic bodes well.
Okay, let me go to Nanjala in Nairobi. And Nanjala, there was one big shadow cast over this election even before the first ballot was cast, and that was the killing of the Electoral Commission's IT manager, the man in charge of this computerized system that Kenya has been using for the first time. What did you make of that, and what kind of confidence did it give Kenyans in the institutions of the country?
I think it's definitely the kind of question that you don't want to have raised 2 days before an election. I think it has definitely thrown a lot of uncertainty into the mix that we simply don't need. You know, the circumstances of Chris Msando's death, the circumstances of his disappearance, the fact that he was tortured, it just raises a lot of anxiety and a lot of speculation with regards to what impact would it have had on the ICT infrastructure. And right now, all the questions that the opposition is raising, pertain directly to the ICT infrastructure around the elections. So it's definitely the kind of question you don't want to have 2 days before such a hotly contested election.
Abdullahi, what did you make of the election? We have these reports coming out of violence breaking out in certain parts of the country. But do you think Kenyans are going to accept this outcome, or could there be a risk here of prolonged violence?
Yeah, I think I want to make it very clear from the outset that Kenyans generally do not have problems on the voting day. The voter turnout, I mean, has consistently been in the higher 70s for the past few elections. I think our problems as a country is the trust deficit within the institutions that are supposed to guarantee peaceful, free and fair elections. And that is largely the electoral management body, that is Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, the police, as well as the judiciary. I just want to pick up from where Nanjala has stated. The murder, the disappearances and subsequent murder of Chris Msando really cast a huge shadow over these elections. And the fact that the opposition is coming out today and saying that, look, the electronic infrastructure has been interfered with, doesn't feel a great deal of people with trust and legitimacy of the process. However, let's be a bit circumspect though. For most part, people are not only focused on the national elections, they are also focused on the local elections, and having all these elections going on at the same time in some ways has, tampered down, if you will, the kind of anxiety and tension. Yes, that is not to say that, the presidency is not the key position. It is by and large, even after decentralization. But I think people's attention are focused in different, to different races at different level. So I think when we're speaking about Kenya's election, having, that distinction between the local and national would be a better, if not nuanced, way of looking at it.
Dorina, so here we have this election with two big names, Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga. Are their policies very different? What do they bring to the election?
Well, they have put forth sort of different manifestos. Raila Odinga is mostly trying to promote change versus, the more status quo that Jubilee is trying to promote. So, they're feeding into different expectations, of the country, and you've seen that tension sort of throughout, whether, kind of if you're unsatisfied with the way things are, then sort of vote for change. I think we've seen those messages come out from the two of them.
Emira, you mentioned the youth vote earlier on, which is an important vote in Kenya. 80% of Kenya's population is younger than 35. They also make up 51% of the 19.5 million people registered to vote. What were the main issues on which they would be voting on?
Jobs, jobs, and jobs, right? It's the economy, and clearly you have young people without jobs clamoring for a better way, clamoring for an economy that meets their needs. You have rampant, issues around inequality, around corruption, how the elite takes care of itself and not the interests of the people. So core issues around an economy that many see as not serving their needs, I think, are at the forefront for young people. You also have tremendous amounts of environmental justice movements and advocates within that young demographic. They are concerned about climate change. They are also concerned about what happens with, places like Lamu that were natural conservation sites that are now seeing that rampant development with ports coming in, the role of China in developing those ports and other infrastructure there. That brings real changes in terms of people's lives and people's well-being, but also in terms of the environmental impact. And so you have young people asking those questions. You also have young people using social media in creative ways, and the burgeoning role of technology in Kenya, as in many other places on the continent now, is really playing a role not only in how people communicate and participate in the democratic process, but also in their expectations for the future. Can an economy continue to see a leapfrogging in terms of the technological gains that will be needed now and into the future? Those are some of the questions that are in both the public discourse and in this kind of young demographic.
Nanjala, in your experience, what was the level of political awareness around this election among young people, and did you find that they coalesced around certain key issues?
I think that's always been the problem, that the youth demographic exists and it's definitely there, but it's never thought about itself as a political unit. And so I would say that there's a real concern about the level of political awareness, especially outside urban areas. I think when you look at how the voting has gone at the gubernatorial level and at the senatorial level, you see a lot of people who on a national level have not been behaving consistently with what you would expect from political leaders. So you have a lot of leaders coming into office that have been indicted in a lot of major economic and political scandals. And for them to carry the election by convincing margin at a gubernatorial, senatorial level certainly raises the question, does the information, does the politics that's happening in Nairobi actually trickle down to the counties? Are voters aware that, you know, when a person gets implicated in a grand corruption scandal, that affects the ability of the economy to create jobs? If the main employment vehicle that is being put together by the government is compromised by a mega corruption scandal, that actually affects the ability of the government to create these jobs for young people. And are young people actually aware of this, and is their political behavior being influenced by that? It's not exactly clear that that's happening right now. And so in terms of, yes, there are many young people in Kenya, and there are many young people who have a lot of political interest, but are they a political unit? I don't think this election has actually demonstrated that, no.
Abdullahi, we hear a lot about jobs in Kenya, the need to create more jobs. In fact, the World Bank produced a report which said that Kenya has one of the highest unemployment rates among the countries of East Africa. Now, President Kenyatta has promised to create 1 million new jobs. How is he going to be able to do that?
I think this is nothing new. The present administration, if the Electoral Commission, you know, declare them the winner, that is Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto on the ticket, has been saying this. They said, you know, a third of the jobs and tenders from the government will be, you know, reserved for the youth. That hasn't happened. You know, the same old crony network of, you know, people who have got, you know, unsavory backgrounds have been able to acquire some of these jobs. So I think I will be hard pressed to see where that will come from. These, you know, large-scale infrastructure projects that are largely funded, you know, by, you know, loans and, you know, concession loans from China. I don't know how much of it will be able to, you know, absorb some of these youth. Never mind that these jobs are temporary. So I think it will be very difficult with the level of corruption that Kenya is experiencing now, with the debt level that is largely unsustainable, that, you know, a lot of institutions, including IMF and World Bank, have started signaling. I think it will be very, very difficult for them to create that job. That level of job opportunities for 1 million, you know, youth that enter the job market annually.
Right. And Dorina, the other problem that Kenya faces is poverty.
Yes.
45% of people living in the country are living below the poverty line. President Kenyatta has also made a promise there, an election promise. He says he will reduce the cost of living for them. Is that just more election rhetoric, or is he going to be able to fulfill that?
Well, I think that, you know, should it sort of break his way in terms of the electoral results, you know, it really determines on how they tackle corruption. I mean, I think that has really been a huge issue for his administration. How they tackle other things, you know, access to education, access to healthcare. I mean, all the things that kind of feed into, you know, somebody's ability to kind of move upward. Some of that might sort of hinge on how, you know, devolution unfolds and how that money is managed at the county level. So a lot really hinges on, you know, sort of that aspect of public, you know, management of public resources, and the past hasn't shown that is, you know, a solid track record for the administration.
All right.
So.
We need to take a break right now. More of our conversation about Kenya's presidential election and what's at stake. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.